Hey, well, welcome back to the last episode in our Healthy Relationships podcast. I am joined by the lovely, the awesome Holly Hilderbrand, our Connections Director at Gateway North, and Norman Garcia, our Gateway Dripping Springs campus pastor. Thank you guys both for being here.
Yeah.
We appreciate you guys.
Looking forward to it.
Can't think of a better way to close it out than with you two. Well, hey, today we are wrapping up with this topic of spiritual alignment, about the people and the relationships in our lives, making sure they're going in the same direction, right? So spiritual alignment. So let me ask this question. What does it look like for you to be running with people who are spiritually in the same place as you, or at least headed in the same direction? What does that practically look like? And why would you say that's important for people who might be listening today?
Yeah. I mean, they say relationships are your future, right? So it's kind of like when you're looking at those that you spend time with, you want to be running in the right direction, in the same direction with each other. And I think for me personally, it's part of my calling in life, being here at Gateway, like who's challenging me, encouraging me, running with me in that. But it's also in my personal life, like outside of Gateway personally, who's encouraging me and challenging me in my personal life. And I think that looks like many different ways. It could be a one-on-one coffee with a good friend of mine that may be holding me accountable to something. Or it could be a group of friends that we decide to meet up, once a month, but we're checking in around maybe spiritual things, but also relationships. I'm unmarried, but I have a lot of married friends. So we're all in it together as far as moving in the same direction. And so I think it looks like it could be sharing scripture together, but it could just be doing life together and sharing day-to-day conversation. What's happening in your world? This is what's happening in mine. And just meeting each other where we're at.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. And what I'm hearing too is the importance of like community when it comes to spiritual alignment.
Yeah.
What would you say to the person who says, you know what, I love Jesus, I just don't really like coming to church, and I don't really want to do the whole group thing because people are not going to get me. What would you say to that person who's like, I love Jesus, not so sure about this whole church thing? How can you spur them on into actually finding some people to run with?
Yeah, and I think the beauty of Gateway, one of the things we say here is that there is this place of I just did it. Anonymity. Yeah. That word is so hard, right?
It's a hard one. It's a tough one.
That there's this place of anonymity sometimes for people when they come to Gateway, that we want them to feel like they can come as they are, right where they're at. But then we do want to encourage them to not stay that way. And that's taking a risk. It's trusting something. Perhaps there's past hurts that you're like, I don't want to step into more relationships, friendships with people, because I've experienced different things being in relationships. Maybe it was a misaligned relationship that you're thinking, I don't want to go back there.
Or church hurt.
Yeah. But I think that's where it just takes a risk. And I think sometimes in conversations that I have with people, it's not like take this big old leap sometimes. It's just what is like one next step you can take? Like what does it look like to just take one step into community? And maybe it's just that one step. And the more you take one step, I think that you're encouraged more and more. And I think you experience that other people are like you. And so sometimes they're taking risks. Right. They're stepping out for the first time. They're stepping out after hurts. And so it's like, you're not alone in that. And so that's the encouragement, is whether you're still far from God and you're trying to figure him out and explore him and ask lots of tough questions, or you're in a deep relationship with God, I think it's just taking one step closer.
That's awesome. We spoke to our students last night, and we were talking about this whole topic, like what Jesus had in mind when you see the beginning of Acts is this family, right? This community that came together. Yeah, they had a lot of messed up stuff going on, but they shared together, they ate together, they lived together, they were going in the same direction together. It was this family aspect of like, you're not meant to do it alone. So in that same vein of kind of family, Norman, I know that you're married and you have 3 kids. What does spiritual alignment look like in your household, in your marriage specifically? And why is it so important for you guys to be on the same page spiritually, you and your wife?
So spiritual alignment is absolutely important, obviously, in a marriage. And there's, as I just kind of think about this and the components of, how do you become spiritually aligned with somebody? How do you grow spiritually? And I just think about, our need, the way we're designed is that we're designed to be connected to other people. And a huge part of growing spiritually is being in community with people who are wanting to move, or at least exploring to move in the same direction that you're moving in. And so, and then, I would say there's three basic components to spiritual growth, which is, having a community of people who desire the same kinds of things you desire and moving in the same direction. There's, getting into Scripture, hearing God's thoughts about you and what he would say about himself for you to understand, and then there's hearing his voice and responding to that. And so all those help me grow spiritually. And as I think about, in a marriage, being in a relationship with my wife and her hearing God's voice, her desiring to hear and understand who God is through the Scriptures and who she is through the Scriptures, and then her desiring to be in a relationship with me to move in that same direction towards God, it's absolutely necessary. And I believe we're designed to be connected with others. Whether you're married or you're not married, I think that spiritual growth happens when we're connected with other people.
That's good. That's great. So here's maybe a little bit of a trickier question because it can get a little convoluted. But how do I know if I'm somebody listening and let's say I just started following Jesus or I've been following Jesus for a long time? How do I know the difference between somebody who's running in the same direction as me versus somebody who might be dragging me down? And is this relationship healthy, right? Like many of us came to faith in our early young adulthood. And there was that messy period where I'm still going to church, but I'm still hanging out with some of the same people where I was, doing some things that I'm not proud of. So how would somebody know the difference, and why is it important to, what kind of boundaries can they create in those kind of relationships? So how do I know when to surround, or who the people are that I should surround myself with? And then how do I know the distinction between somebody who's dragging me down?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. But I think the first thing that comes to my mind is I would want this for anyone who's around me. So if I would want it for anyone who's around me, I would want it for myself, right? To be able to, in any situation, show up my true, authentic self.
That's good.
And you know what that looks like. You yourself knows if you are 100% the best version of yourself, which is every day hard, but you still know what it would look like, and you're not being that, there's probably something that is causing that. There's a friction, there's a tension that is showing up, that you're having maybe that gut check or a nudge in you that's something's off, something doesn't feel right, but it could be more internally with you because you realize I'm not being able to show up my true authentic self. And I think that's that litmus test. If that's not being able to happen, then either perhaps a conversation needs to happen. And that's where a lot can be figured out, is communication, and just how are we figuring out, are we aligned? Are we going after the same things? Are we going in the same direction? But I think you can also tell that just by the other person, even asking the question, do you feel like you can show up your true authentic self when you're around me?
That's good.
And so I think just exploring that really does give you, like I said, just that gut check or that nudge to know, I don't know that maybe this is a healthy relationship, or there's something that needs to shift or change in it for it to become healthier.
So practically speaking, it could be maybe somebody's listening and they've just come to faith and they're really excited about, following Jesus. And they're either maybe in an intimate relationship with somebody who's not following Jesus, or they're super friends with somebody. They're great friends with somebody, but every time they want to bring it up, it's like a red flag. It's I don't want to talk about that. Let's not go there. You know how I feel about talking about religion. And there's that block there. What I'm hearing from you is there has to come to a place, hey, if I can't show up with what I'm excited about and what is happening in my life, maybe there needs to be some boundaries that we have to put up in this relationship, right?
Yeah, I think it's also, if I can't show up and be excited about something, but also if you're on this trajectory and in this direction in life, and someone's also not encouraging you towards that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's also the flip side of that, right? If you have this mission, or you have this thing you want to go after, and perhaps people are pulling you down because of a lack of encouragement or a lack of cheering you on. I think that's also a thing that you can use to look and see, is this person really the person that I need to be surrounded by? Are they going to cheer me on in the way that I want to go?
That's good. Norm, I want to ask you this question, and then maybe Holly, if you have an example too you want to share. But where have you maybe in life experienced misalignment in a relationship, in a friendship, family dynamic, friend dynamic, where you realize, man, this isn't a healthy relationship because we're not going in the same direction spiritually. What was that season like? What did you learn, and what happened?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it kind of takes me way back to best friend. Actually, before I became a believer, and we were best buds. We had each other's back, and we had a real deep commitment to each other. It's something that was very valuable to me. This is a guy who would jump into an angry mob for me.
Yeah.
This is a guy that I'd take the rap for, and some wrongdoings that we were doing, and we were just there for each other. If I had $100 and he had $200, we had $300 together, and so we had this real we had a connection, and we had each other's backs, and it was a very valuable thing to me. But as we were, living this life, way back then, partying and thinking that was what it was all about, and I started sensing just this deep void in my life and emptiness in my life, and really longing for something else, realizing that whatever I was living at this point is not doing it. I started asking questions and started saying, I don't know if I want to go do that tonight. I don't know if I want to, hang out and do that tonight. And I remember I love this guy, and he loved me, and he demonstrated how much he cared about me, how much he was for me. But there was a time where I was looking at him and trying to understand, is there, as much as I care about my friend, as much as I want to be a good friend to him, I'm not seeing the hope in him that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And I'm not finding answers in this. And I remember he looked at me and he said, we were having an argument because he wanted me to go to the beach with him, which usually meant trouble for us. And I was like, no, I'm not going to go this time. He said, Norman, you just think you're so good, and you think you've got it all together, and there's nothing good in you. Nothing's ever going to come in your life. And my answer to him was, well, maybe not, but maybe, just maybe, if I break it up, get away from you for a little while, I might be able to find some direction and get clear on how I can make some good come out of my life. And so we kind of broke up a little bit, as our bromance broke up at the time. And and what's interesting is, based off of that, a few months later, I end up becoming a believer, and he ends up in prison. And it was a very difficult thing, because I cared about this guy, and I knew he cared about me. But there was a time, and I could come together and sit down and, have a coffee or something like that, or have lunch with him, and we could talk and we could share openly and honestly. I could be authentic. He could be authentic. But it was when he wanted me, oh, come on, one more time, Norman, just one more time. That was the time where I had to say, no, I got to separate myself from this situation. So, as much as he was for me, I had to look in other places where I did find hope, where I did see the possibility of something better coming out of my life. I kept that relationship with him, but
That's good. That it reminds me almost of a quote like that I heard T.D. Jakes said one time, that there's people that are for what you're for. Like, as long as you have things in common, you're running at the same place. But the minute there's a discussion or an argument, things kind of go their separate ways. There's people who are against what you're against. Like, when there's a fight, they're with you. You know what I mean? They got your backs. But then there are just people who are for you in every season, in and out of, no matter what the circumstances. And it's looking for that. Holly, what has been maybe some a season of your life where maybe there was some misalignment spiritually, whether it was romantically or friendship or coworker rise? Maybe it went your separate ways, or maybe you were able to heal that. Could you give us maybe an example in that direction?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you bring that up. I'm thinking of a season where I probably had some misalignment in several different areas at the same time. And I think back, and you alluded to a while ago, just people that have some church hurt. And I think for me, that is part of my history and my story. And I think when I stepped away from a past space in my life, a different church, different people, it was because I believe there was a misalignment. Now, more of that could have been value driven, not necessarily around just relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what it did was it did set off this season of depression and loneliness and hurt, and trying to process that when you feel like you've had visually speaking, you've experienced a lot of divorces and a lot of deaths because there were a lot of relationships left behind. And so I think that when I stepped into that next season, it was out of a place of probably desperation of grabbing on to something or someone that I thought in that moment would bring me peace, would bring me hope, would bring me healing, would also just make me feel loved, make me feel secure, and in a place when I felt very insecure, very questionable who I was, where am I headed, what's next for me, kind of thing. And so that's where I think that misalignment there then filtered in, rippled effect into other relationships. And so I think we find that, and thankfully during that season of misalignment in several different, places and spaces, romantically, friendship-wise, all of that, I did do the work to come back around.
Yeah.
And I did find healing, true deep healing, in a church, and that was Gateway.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where if we still, there's still that part of us, right? Like there's that conscious and unconscious part of us that is still wanting good, that is still wanting relationship, that is still wanting it to be healthy. And so even in a season of unhealthiness, that was still deep within me. And so I think in doing the work and coming back around, a lot of recovery work, we've talked about that, just being able to work through making amends, asking for forgiveness, lots of those things that come with misalignment. I was able to come back around where I was able to find myself in a season of true alignment in a way I've never experienced before after a season of misalignment in several
healing.
Different spaces and healing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's great. I love that. A lot of people listening to this might find themselves married or in a relationship or seeking a relationship. And both of you are coming from different vantage points, which I think is beautiful, so you can speak to kind of both angles. But when it comes to marriage, Norman, how do you practically, what does it look like for you and your wife to be on the same page spiritually? What are some practices that you put into your family dynamics, into your marriage, whether it's be a rhythm that you guys have of, hey, we're going to do a date night here, or we're going to pray together at nights, whatever it may look like. What's a practical thing that you guys do that keeps you honest, that keeps you accountable in your marriage?
Yeah, I think communication is number one. Just talking to each other, being willing to have discussions about good times, and God's doing something really amazing in my life, or I'm really struggling in my life, and having that connection on the level of where we can talk honestly with each other, authentically with each other. We're not pretending with each other that it's better than it really is in the moment. That's huge. And then going to prayer together is huge. And then praying, agreeing to pray for each other separately. As we know, there's this issue that I'm struggling with, or right now Tracy recently lost her mom, and I just and so that's a constant thing that I'm praying for her about. And I'm checking in with her. How you doing? How are you feeling? Or if she's struggling, maybe she's not even aware of, that she is struggling. And I'll notice, like maybe she's a little more down or whatever. And I'll go check in and say, hey, how you feeling? Are you thinking about your mom, or, and so that kind of, it's that, when you get to know somebody and you know who they are, and you recognize those cues, and you just respond in that way. I see you need help here. I see that you're taking a lot of joy in this, and celebrate that, with
That's
them
beautiful.
too. So,
I love that. And people might be listening like, okay, yeah, sure, prayer, that's basic, but that's so key. It's so money. It's really hard to be angry or mad at somebody that you're praying for on a consistent basis. And I think that's marriage, that's coworkers, right? That's, family members that get on your nerves. When you're coming to them before God in prayer, there's a softening of your heart. There's a compassion that you begin to feel for them. So coming at it from another angle of being single, Holly. And let me start off saying this. I think as a church, not just Gateway, but the global church, we don't do a good enough job of talking about singleness.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? It feels like we're sometimes always pointing people to get married or get in a relationship. And, we do a very poor job, I think, about talking about singleness. But can you help us, and for those who are listening, which we've got a lot of singles in our church, we got a lot of singles who are going to be listening to this, what does it practically look like to be aligned with Jesus, right? Before always seeking to, what's the next friendship or the next relationship or the next thing that I'm going to jump into? What does that look like? What does it look like for your life? That spiritual alignment between you and God first.
Yeah, I think that's a really big question.
Yeah.
And I think for unmarried people, like it takes a lot of sitting with that in order to actually even figure out what it looks like for them. Because I think people are coming from all different, places in life. Some could have been never married like me. Some could have been married and now they're finding themselves unmarried again. Some people are even, lifespan is longer. And so they're just widowed and widower, like
Right.
at an older age. And so they're even
That's
finding
good.
after this long period of time of being with somebody,
Who am I
now,
Yeah.
who am I? I'm unmarried again. And what does that look like? And I think that what we miss is in those seasons of waiting, the devotion that we can find with God is really sweet. And it shows up in different ways. Like it's whether you're choosing time or energy or resources, like using the gifts that you have, the way that God's created you, and going after those, like really spending time going after that and not alone. Maybe there is something that God's calling you to do alone, but it could be grabbing 3 or 4 friends and saying, hey, let's go after this together. Is this a common cause that we can have together that we can also find fun in? It's not so serious all the time, but there's an element of fun. And I think that's, again, it goes back to what Norm said at the beginning. Like it still goes back to community, and God has created and designed us to be together with each other. But for singleness, it does start with a devotion to Him.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where contentment comes from. And so a lot of times it's just like what Philippians says, like I want to be content in whatever circumstances. And many times as an unmarried individual, that's hard. There is a dichotomy sometimes that you find yourself as, do I hang out with married people, but then that makes me feel lonely? Do I, like, there's those different things. I have the ups and the downs, at the ebbs and the flows. Do I date? Do I not date? Like all of those different questions, like where am I at in the season of life? But I do think it comes back to saying, am I content in whatever circumstances I'm in? And then where the outflow is, that comes from that. And I think too, for unmarried people, it's an eternal perspective. And sometimes we don't stop long enough to think about that, because it can just be a perspective shift that we've got to have. I don't think that God really wants us to walk around the rest of our life as unmarried people, just longing for this next date or the next person or the next thing or the next whatever.
Yeah, that's good.
Because out of the hope of getting married, I would love to be married, and I still hold tight to that desire of my heart. But I also know that if God chooses in my story to not bring me a spouse, I'm okay.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot of work, and that does not mean that I don't have really bad days, because you do.
And it doesn't happen overnight.
And it does not happen overnight. But I think that also goes to what you're asking. Like, how do you surround yourself with people who can actually spur you on also as an unmarried in your relationship with God? And that comes from hanging out with married people.
Yeah.
Like that is also just a really big thing, is that as unmarried people, I want to hang out with married people.
Yeah.
Because I think we can learn with each other, and we are all a part of the family of God. And so we're brothers and we're sisters, and that is one big family. And so how do we find each other in that as unmarried and married together, still pursuing alignment?
That's great. I love what you said. You said you've just got to sit with it, right? I think there's a difference between waiting, on God, and waiting like, God, when's it going to happen? When's it going to right?
For sure.
Because if you sit with it, you get the Holy Spirit to really answer some of those questions, like, okay, who am I if this never happens? Am I still gonna and almost hearing from Jesus, like, are you still gonna love me?
For sure.
If this never materializes.
I got something on that.
Yeah,
Ricky.
for sure.
I just think about it. I kind of lucked out. God brought Tracy to me, I believe, before I actually had it worked out, this sitting with Jesus and finding contentment with Him. I didn't have that worked out before I got married. I do believe that Tracy was the person I was supposed to be married. I believe that was God's will, but married to. So And I ended up having to work that out after I was married.
Yeah.
It was so to have that before, I think there would have been a lot more peace in our relationship, especially early on, if I'd had worked out that contentment with Jesus and knowing that really He is the source. Tracy can't play the role of God in my
so
life.
good.
Yeah.
That's so good. I think that's great advice for alignment for married people, right? It's, hey, who am I without being next to this person? Not that we're going to make some drastic decisions about our relationship, but God, what do you want to do in me apart from them?
Yeah.
Because I think when we just view ourselves next to them, we're like, well, they're doing this, that causes this in my life, or I need them for X, Y, and Z. And it's really coming to a place of reliance on God and who He is.
Yeah.
Last question I want us to wrap up with is this. If somebody out there is listening and they're really struggling with like, yeah, I get it. I'm supposed to be around people, I'm supposed to be running in the same spiritual direction. But why? Like, can you give one nugget of like, why is this a value for somebody? Not just, hey, this will make you a better Christian, but like, what is the value, the deep value that it can present to my life? Why should I be in alignment with people spiritually? Why should I have a running partner? Why should I go to this group? Why should I make it a priority for me and my family to be spiritually on the same page or coming to church together? The why. Could you give us one nugget with why? I'll start with you, Holly.
Yeah, I just think I want to go back to what I said before, is that at the end of the day, I really hope I'm showing up my true, authentic self. And we all have shadow sides, but to walk with people, they help you in that. Like, they can hold you to your true, authentic self, and they also can know your shadow side. Like, you can, a friendship or a relationship is defined by how deep you go, right? So if I share that shadow side with somebody, then they're also able to speak truth into that. So that speaks to the true, authentic self of who I am. And so I think that really is, that's the nugget, is going back to sitting with what is and what does it look like to show up your true, authentic self, and then pursue that in community, and allow people to speak into that with you. It takes risk. It takes a lot of trust. But when you do it, and you may be hurt, we're not guaranteed that we still won't be hurt in that, right? But I think when you do that, you're actually going to come out on the other side of it, and you're going to be really grateful that you allowed people in with you in that space, so that you could all be going, in the same direction and spiritually aligned together.
Awesome. I love that. Showing up genuine, transparent, honest, authentic, and without filters.
Yeah, for sure.
And saying, this is who I am, kind of take it or leave it, but I need to do this with you in community.
Yeah,
that's
for sure.
Great. What's one reason why, Norman?
I just a little bit sort of different take, but in alignment with what Holly said. I was just thinking about, just as human beings, what are the things that drive us, the things that we long for, the things that we believe are going to bring, make life meaningful. And I think that's, meaning is something that we all as human beings desire. We want intimacy, we want love, and we want to believe that there's good in our future. And I think that, when the scriptures say that God created us in His image, and when we're created in His image, that means a lot of different things. We're relational, like God is relational. We're creative. We can be creative, like God is creative. We can be, God. We believe from the scriptures that God is the giver of life. We can be life-giving to people, and people can be life-giving to us. And so just going back to that idea, if we're created in the image of God, in His likeness, He was in relationship even before anything was created, and that gets into a whole theological discussion. But He was in relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? And so when He created us to be in relationship, and that's where we're designed in such a way that we are going to find our best selves connected to Him and to others, and those things that we're longing for in life are going to come in community,
right?
As we are willing to love another human being, and we're willing to receive love from another human being, and so many of the things that that really make life meaningful and beautiful and good can only come through relationships, and those things, especially when someone is walking in dependence, in faith, in relationship with God, and then you're connected to others, those things start flowing because God's the source of goodness, right?
Yeah.
He's the source of beauty. He's the source of joy and peace. And so now those things are being multiplied in those
There's
relationships.
a beautiful aspect of doing community with people who are following Jesus, not perfect, but going in the same direction that can spur you on, that can encourage you, versus just kind of blowing right past you and missing you. I love that. Thank you guys so much for showing up today
For sure.
and wrapping up our
thank
podcast.
you guys.
And we hope that you catch future episodes of our podcast here at Gateway. God bless you.